Okay, so today I thought I would do a video on composition, mainly because someone requested it and I thought it was a good idea, and it was also a good practice for me, so that's what we're gonna do. So I kind of broke it down into 8 tips or 8 rules to remember when you're making a composition. And I tried to break it down step by step while I did this drawing, but I'm sorry if it gets confusing because it's kind of hard to think about all of these at the same time. When you make a composition, you don't have to use all of these. They're just things to bear in mind. If you're not really feeling a composition, try and work these things into it. Like the way that I work is that I do a very rough sketch to begin with, and then try and change a little bit so that it fits in with the rules that I'm gonna explain. And all around it just makes it look a lot more balanced and appealing. So I didn't know what to paint for this video, so I put some questions up on my Instagram story asking what kind of scene you'd like to see. So you guys wanted to see a cold, wet landscape, and I think urban and rural were 50-50 last time I saw. So I thought I would kind of work two together, and I painted like a city in the distance, but the city's in like a fantasy countryside kind of thing. I think it was a cool idea, so I'm going to try and make a good composition based on it. So the first rule is the rule of thirds. So that's when you split the page up into thirds, both horizontally and vertically, and your points of interest will be on the places that they intersect. So it's good to always put your point of focus on one of these 4 points, because that's just naturally where the eye goes to. So I put my like distant castle with its city behind it on the top right hand point, and then I put a stone bridge that was more in the foreground on the bottom left point. And yeah, so this is where I started off. So the next rule you've probably also seen diagrams of, because it's a very old rule, but it is the golden ratio. So whenever I do this, I never like mathematically calculate it. It's just like a rough swirl that I draw on, and this basically shows like how crowded certain areas need to be. So you can see in my piece, so you've got like big shapes down at the very bottom, and then it swirls into the distance where there's like this whole city and it's a lot more crowded in that area. This also works with the rule of thirds because the swirl is placed on the crossroads point, so that's definitely where your eye is drawn to. The golden ratio can also be used as like a journey for where you want your eye to follow. Yeah, the golden ratio can be used in a lot of different ways to symbolize different things within your drawing. So the next thing I'm gonna do, I've kind of done all I can do on paper, so I'm just gonna take a quick picture of the page and then do some more work on it on my iPad, just because I can resize things and I can work with lots of different layers of sketches. So I've got my sketch here, and the next rule I'm going to focus on is perspective or leading lines. Now, I feel like I should do a whole other video on perspective because everyone gets confused by it. They get more complicated the more vanishing points you have. So you have 1 point perspective, 2 point, and 3 point. So yeah, I'm gonna use the perspective rule to make the drawing of my city in the distance more accurate. I'm gonna do 2 point perspective for my castle. A low down angle looking up, it tends to make things seem bigger and grander and more intimidating, whereas if you have a high up shot looking down, it makes things look smaller and more insignificant. So I want this castle to be very big and beautiful, so the horizon line, which is the straight line that I'm working on, that's going to connect to my vanishing point, and you can use this horizon line to help with the angle of your perspective. Basically, you just draw a point that you want where you want your vanishing point to be, and then you just have to remember that all the lines lead into that point. So we've got my perspective there. So now I'm going to do leading lines, and basically that means that as a few things in the page kind of gravitate towards this point of focus, even though it's not perspective because not everything is going into this vanishing point, just subtly pointing towards the point of focus. So yeah, basically leading lines are just subtle little things that guide your eye towards where you want it to go. So like I'm using these shading lines to just point your eye to the center point of this drawing. So the next thing I quickly want to mention, and again this isn't something that you necessarily have to structure a whole drawing around, it's just something to bear in mind, is diagonal lines. Horizontal and vertical lines look very unnatural, especially in something like this where it is kind of a natural, well, partly a natural landscape. Like all of these rock formations, the more diagonal lines you have, the more natural it looks. And I am aware that it's not a great example for this particular piece because I have a lot of vertical lines because of the waterfalls and because of the architecture of the castle. So the next thing to think about is contrast. I'm going to show this by adding some quick shading to see what areas I want to be the darkest and what areas I want to be the lightest. I want this castle to be the lightest, so it kind of looks like it's bathing in sunlight and it's almost a light source. And then everything in the foreground I want to be slightly darker. Not only does this work with this particular piece and it gives off the vibe that I want it to, but it also is just good practice for perspective, because when things get further away from you, they get lighter and all around just kind of fade into the background a little bit more. So you can see the different elements of this piece. So the river, the water is basically going to be the lightest thing, and then the shadows on the rocks are going to be the darkest thing. So the next thing to bear in mind is negative space and framing. These don't always have to go together. I use them together in this particular piece because the negative space created by these rocks does frame the focal point. You can use negative space for a lot of different things. I tend to go for framing because I think it looks cool. Yeah, this is also a thing that I've noticed photographers use a lot, is how to frame something with something else or the negative space of something else. But yeah, I really like this rule, and I think it's good practice to just always think about, so not only think about what you're drawing, think about the space that's left by what you're drawing. Okay, so the next thing I'm gonna mention more about your concept than your composition, but is to think about a storyline. And this kind of ties into the way that I use the golden ratio in this particular drawing, because your eye looks around the drawing like you're going on a journey. So you look at the foreground first, and then your eye kind of travels around further and further into the distance until it reaches the castle, which is at the point furthest away from the camera. And that's like your journey's destination almost. So yeah, it's nice to just think about the story behind what you're drawing, because it just gives it a little more depth and it makes it make sense. And again, I'm going to use the word compelling because it's a good word and I think it applies here. Okay, so I mentioned it just now, but my last point that I'm gonna, tip number 8, is probably my favorite one of all. I use it in absolutely everything. It is depth of field. So I think whenever I draw something, I draw it 2D and then I think about how it would exist in a 3D space. And the way I do this is by, in my mind, separating each bit onto its own plane of existence. So the plane furthest away would be those cliffs right in the background, and then in front of it, if you think about it like a puppet show. So you have the box at the front with the curtains, that's in the very foreground. In the midground you have where the puppets move, and at the background you have a backdrop. So if you think about it in that sense, it's just that some pieces require a lot more midgrounds where the puppets move. So yeah, there we go. That's our composition sketch. I did do a whole painting based on this with inks, but I wasn't too happy with how it turned out. I think I just messed up some of the colors. I really like the way that I inked it, and then I just went and messed it up with colors. I think it's just because I was short on time, so I cut a few corners and it didn't really work out in my favor. I did try a new style of colouring where I put a gradient down on the page first, and I thought that that was a good start, but it didn't go nowhere. I think I should have just done some more work on picking a colour palette before I dove in. So what I did is I did a digital drawing as well. I will be doing a digital drawing as well, hopefully. If I did, I'll put that on screen now. Hopefully that turned out better, and I think it'll be interesting to see the difference between traditional and digital in this sense. So there we go, I did it. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something. I hope that I made sense. Thank you for your patience if you've got this far. And yeah, I will hopefully see you around in future. So, see ya.